They say some people vanish quietly, like dust slipping off a windowsill. But I learned the hard way that even the quiet ones leave echoes behind. And sometimes those echoes call you back when you least expect it. I was reminded of that on the morning everything changed, when a young seasonal picker named Mateo found an old field jacket tucked behind the orchard shed. The name tape sun-faded but still readable, Echo, and he brought it over asking if it belonged to me, stirring a part of my past. I had worked 3 long years to bury, before I even answer that. If you believe people deserve respect, even when you don't know their story, like and subscribe. It helps our voices reach places that overlook folks like us. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because sometimes the smallest stories travel the farthest. Anyway, that jacket in Mateo's hand set the tone for the day. The same day the officer showed up. The same day the name I'd sworn never to hear again came. Roaring back with a force so strong it made the trees feel smaller. I remember how the wind felt oddly warm for a late autumn morning. The kind that carries both comfort and warning, like the earth knows something is about to break differently than expected. And I was out between rows 18 and 19, filling crates under the shade of the old pear trees that had stood here longer than most families in town. I had come to the orchard for peace, for anonymity, for the soothing repetition of hands picking fruit instead of handling the weight of decisions that used to define me. And for 3 years, everyone who worked beside me believed I was just a quiet 28-year-old woman who liked her space, someone who kept to herself because she preferred it. Not because she was trying to outrun memories that still woke her in the middle of the night. They didn't know I once served in a rapid response unit. Didn't know the Army once called me Echo. Didn't know that a single mission gone wrong had left me feeling like I didn't deserve the uniform anymore. So I left it behind along with the name. Slipped away to rebuild myself among branches and soil and silence, letting the rhythm of the orchard teach me how to be a person again. People whispered sometimes about my scars, my quiet, my avoidance of local events. But whispers don't bother you much when you survive firefights, and besides, peace isn't the absence of sound, it's the right kind of sound, and for me, that sound was the soft thud of pears landing in crates, the hum of bees, the crunch of boots on dirt paths. That morning I'd settled into my usual pace, letting my mind drift, when the sound of an engine rumbling up the gravel cut through everything. Not the farm trucks we normally heard, but something heavier, official, out of place. My heart didn't speed up, but my hands stopped moving, like my body recognized the threat before I did. The black SUV came to a stop at the edge of the orchard, the doors opening. With that distinct, rehearsed finality you only hear from military vehicles, and the field workers gradually fell quiet, curiosity spreading like wildfire. Then I saw the man stepping out. A crisp uniform, polished boots, posture so straight it made the horizon jealous, and I felt my throat tighten even though he hadn't addressed me yet. It wasn't fear, not exactly. More like the dread of an inevitable truth arriving years earlier than you hoped. He scanned the rows until his eyes locked on mine. And the orchard stilled, every worker sensing something unusual, something bigger than seasonal labor disputes or farm inspections. And then he said it, the words slicing through the warm air with precision. Echo, deployment at dawn. He didn't raise his voice, didn't bark it the way officers often do, but somehow everyone heard, everyone froze, and I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me at once. Confusion mixing with shock, because the quiet girl with the burnt scar on her shoulder, who rarely spoke more than she needed to, who ate lunch, alone under the old water tower, had just been identified like someone out of a different world entirely. Mateo's mouth fell open, Mari crossed herself, and old Mr. Ramirez actually dropped a full crate of fruit, the pears rolling across the ground like startled marbles. I wanted to deny it, tell them he had the wrong person, that Echo was someone else, someone stronger, someone braver. But the officer kept his gaze steady, waiting, knowing I had no real escape. My legs felt heavy as if the earth itself didn't want to let me go back into the life I'd sworn off. But I stepped forward anyway, because something in his eyes told me this wasn't a drill, wasn't a formality, wasn't a recall for some bureaucratic reason. It was personal, urgent, something tied to the past I'd buried so deep I thought it would never surface. As I approached him, whispers rippled through the orchard, people trying to fit the pieces together. My scars, my silence, the jacket, the rumors, and for the first time, In years I saw myself reflected not as the quiet orchard girl, but as the soldier I once was, the one I thought had died inside me. When I finally reached him, he leaned in just enough for me to hear the soft, devastating sentence that explained everything. It's about the child, the one from the convoy. My world tilted, my breath thinned, and suddenly I understood why he came himself instead of sending paperwork. The orchard started to spin slightly, not from fear but from the weight of memory, because hearing that sentence was like reopening a wound I'd spent years stitching shut. I closed my eyes for just a moment, long enough to whisper a truth I hadn't spoken aloud since the day I walked away. Echo reporting. And around me, the orchard workers stood silent, the fruit forgotten, the sun suddenly harsh, as if they'd all realized at once that the quiet girl who picked pears beside them wasn't disappearing, she was being called. And dawn, whether I wanted it or not, was already on its way. Walking beside the officer felt like stepping back into a life I had sworn I'd never revisit, each crunch of gravel under my boots sounding too familiar, too much like the cadence of patrol movements I used to lead. And though the orchard faded behind us, I could still feel pairs of eyes tracking every step, the stunned silence of my coworkers clinging to my back like a second shadow. The officer didn't speak at first, and I didn't press him, because when someone comes in person instead of sending a written summon, it means something has gone very wrong. And somewhere deep down, beneath the layers of soil and anonymity I'd wrapped myself in, I already knew what name he was about to say before he said it. Once we reached the SUV, he finally exhaled the tension he'd been holding and told me everything. The convoy wasn't military, it was humanitarian. A small team delivering medical supplies to a remote valley where government aid rarely reached, and they'd been ambushed without warning. 3 were confirmed dead, 1 captured, but 1 survivor had managed to send out a distress signal using an old Echo Team code. A code we only ever taught to civilians who became entangled with our missions. And as soon as he mentioned that, 1,000 buried memories rose like dust in sunlight, because I knew exactly which civilian he meant. The same orphan child we'd pulled from the rubble on my final mission. The same kid who had held onto my sleeve with a grip stronger than fear itself and whispered a thank you in a language I'd barely understood. The same kid whose safety I had sworn to ensure even though I knew I wouldn't be around to keep that promise. The officer said they believed the teen was hiding somewhere in the hills near the border, alone, frightened, low on resources, and clinging to the one thing they remembered. The signal Echo Team had taught them, the one meant specifically to reach me. Guilt hit me harder than any blast I'd survived, because when I left the military, I had convinced myself the world would move on without me, that the loose ends would tie themselves, that the child I'd once protected would grow up safe, unaware that the ghost of my call sign would ever matter again. But here it was, Echo, a name no one in the orchard had ever heard, but a name someone across the world had remembered in their most desperate moment. The officer's voice softened, surprising me, as he explained how the brass had argued about recalling me, some believing I wouldn't return, others arguing they had no right to disrupt the new life I'd built. But ultimately the child's use of the Echo code made the choice for them, because there were only 2 possibilities. Either I was the one they were calling for, or the code had been compromised, and both scenarios required me. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the orchard shrink in the side mirror, wondering what the workers were thinking now. Did they picture me in some dramatic uniform, commanding troops? Or did they simply feel betrayed that the quiet woman beside them had never told them who she really was? But the truth was, I hadn't lied. I had just become someone else, someone who could breathe again. The highway rolled out beneath us, long and familiar, and I let myself remember the last mission, the one that ended Echo Team. How we'd been escorting a small group of families through a conflict zone when the intel failed us. How the ambush had come from a slope we thought was clear. How the explosion had taken 2 of my teammates instantly, leaving nothing but fire and ringing ears in the aftermath. And how I had blamed myself so fiercely, so completely, that when the Army offered me an honorable discharge with restricted records, I took it without hesitation, convinced that the world would be safer if Echo simply vanished. I didn't tell the officer any of this, of course, because he already knew the sanitized version, the one written in reports, not the truth. The truth that I didn't leave because I wanted to, but because I believed I no longer deserved to lead anyone. As the base came into view, the old adrenaline I thought I'd buried began to pulse through me. The gates rising like the mouth of a past I had locked away, and I braced myself for the looks, the questions, the whispers that always follow someone who returns from self-imposed exile. But when I stepped out of the SUV, something unexpected happened. No one stared. No one whispered. No one judged. Instead, several soldiers stood at attention, their expressions steady, respectful, almost relieved, as if my arrival meant something bigger than I understood. The officer led me inside a briefing room where maps covered the walls, satellite images marked in red, and a single file with my old call sign printed on the cover lay at the center of the table, untouched, waiting for me like a relic of someone I used to be. As he explained the terrain, the hostage likelihood, the suspected group responsible for the ambush, and the narrow window of time before a full-scale extraction became impossible, I felt the old instincts clicking back into place. Not pride, not excitement, but purpose, the kind that burns steady and quiet, the kind that tells you running won't save anyone. Then he showed me a grainy still frame from drone footage, a small figure crouched beside a cliff wall, sending faint flashes of light in the exact echo pattern I had taught years ago, the pattern I'd said they would never need again. Seeing that image shattered whatever distance I had tried to create between my present and my past. And in that moment I knew peace was something I'd have to reclaim later, after the rescue, after the promise was kept. I closed the file, stood up, and said the words I thought I'd never say again. Tell the team to prep. Echo moves at dawn. Dawn came not with fanfare, but with the quiet resolve of people who understood the weight of what lay ahead. And as the helicopter blades carved through the cold morning air, I felt the strange fusion of old instincts and new fear twisting inside me. Not fear of death, but fear of failing again. Fear of facing the ghost of my last command, and finding out I had learned nothing from the years I spent hiding in orchards in silence. The team assigned to me wasn't Echo, not the one I had loved and lost, but they carried themselves with the same unspoken discipline, the same sharp attentiveness. And though none of them knew me beyond a dossier of sealed records and cautionary notes, they trusted me without question as we descended into the valley where the ambush had taken place. The terrain was steep and scarred, the remnants of burned-out vehicles scattered like broken ribs along the cliffside, and the air carried the heavy quiet that follows violence, the kind that feels almost too still, too watchful. We moved low and fast, following the narrow path identified on the satellite images, and every footstep felt like a countdown. Every rustle a reminder of how quickly things had gone wrong the last time I'd led people into danger. But then, tucked into a narrow ravine exactly where the drone footage had suggested, I saw it. A flicker of light, a signal deliberate and rhythmic, faint but unmistakable. My chest tightened as we edged closer, weapons ready, the team covering, angles with crisp precision. And when I whispered the counter signal into the morning air, the light immediately paused, then flashed back the reply I hadn't heard in years. Stepping around the bend, I saw the teen, older now than the child I'd once carried through debris, but still with the same determined eyes, huddled against the stone, bruised, exhausted, but alive. And when they recognized me, their entire bodies seemed to unlock with relief. The moment felt both surreal and painfully real. As if time had folded in on itself and delivered me back to the promise I had tried so hard to run from. We didn't have time for reunions, though, because the enemy presence in the area was still high and extraction routes were limited, so the team formed a protective diamond around us, guiding us through the tight passages and over the loose shale that slid under our boots. Gunfire erupted in the distance, sharp and sudden, but it wasn't aimed at us, and we used the confusion to push upward, toward the extraction point, every breath feeling like a prayer held between clenched teeth. When the helicopter finally surged into view, its blades whipping dust into the sky, the teen stumbled beside me, nearly collapsing, and I caught them with an arm that remembered their weight, remembered carrying them before. But this time they walked on their own legs, their own strength, and when we lifted off the ground, the valley shrinking below us, I felt a strange mix of grief and triumph. Grief for the unit I'd lost, triumph that I hadn't added another name to the list. Back at the base, medics rushed the teen away, and though I wanted to follow, to stay beside them like I once promised, The officer stopped me with a look that understood too much. He told me they were safe, that my presence would only overwhelm them in their current state, and instead he asked me a question I didn't expect. What now, Echo? The call sign hit differently then. Not like a demand, not like a reminder of failure, but like a recognition of something I'd reclaimed. I didn't have an answer for him. Not right away, because the truth was, I didn't know if I belonged here anymore or if my place was back among the pear trees and quiet routines. But I did know that running wasn't who I was, not really, and hiding had only ever postponed the pain, not healed it. After giving a full debrief and watching the teens stabilize in the medical wing, I took a transport back to the small town I'd left behind just the day before, and the ride felt different this time. Less like retreating, more like returning with purpose rather than shame. When the SUV rolled into the orchard, the workers were already gathered, the crates untouched, their faces carrying a mixture of awe and warmth, and something gentler than admiration. Respect, the kind that isn't loud or performative, but real. Mateo approached first, handing me the same faded field jacket he'd found, and instead of asking questions, he simply nodded, as if saying he didn't need explanations to understand the person standing in front of him. The foreman walked up next, eyes old and soft, telling me that my place would always be here as long as I wanted it, no matter who I had been before. And for the first time in years, I felt the tightness in my chest loosen, not because I had returned to anonymity, but because I no longer needed to hide. I hung the jacket on a nail inside the shed, not as something to be buried or worshipped, but as a reminder that both versions of me, the soldier and the orchard worker, could coexist without drowning each other. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the orchard gold, I saw the teen's photo appear on the base's secure communication feed, smiling weakly in a hospital gown with a simple caption beneath it, "Safe." That was all I needed. I stood there among the trees, breathing in the scent of soil and fruit and possibility, and for the first time since my last mission, I whispered into the quiet, not as a call sign, not as a soldier reporting for duty, but as myself. I kept my promise. And just like that, Echo didn't feel like a name dragging me backward anymore. It felt like a part of me I could carry forward, on my own terms, in my own time, whenever the world needed me again.